Hello, everyone. Welcome to another. I don't know. I feel like I'm saying another episode, but welcome to another video. Today, we're going to be. I'm joined by Lawrence Anton, who had a discussion with that vegan lawyer. I think it was yesterday or the day before.
Uh,
And sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I think it was yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. So I just wanted to review the video with you, and have if you had any thoughts on it. My thoughts on the overall discussion. I was pleased by the um how do I put it? Um the candor of the conversation. I'm glad. I think I liked how you were defining terms um throughout at the start, trying to understand what she meant by agnosticism, because I've seen some people say agnosticism is the claim that you can't know something versus uncertainty. And you appeal to the precautionary principle without the knowledge of if the person's going to have a good or bad life, that we should err on the side of caution to not cause harm to that individual. Though it's pretty much guaranteed that all beings that are created are going to be harmed, or their consent is going to be violated, which you did talk about later on in the discussion. So I thought that was pretty good too. I think when presenting anti-natalist arguments, I think it's appropriate, and I don't know if you agree with this, but to present the two most popular arguments for it: the axiological asymmetry underpinning the other asymmetries of life, and the consent argument. What do you think about that?
No, well, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I did it in the conversation as we'll see later. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and it was interesting. She brought up Sam Harris. I think she was looking for a type of empirical objective morality for making these claims, because she kept bringing up measurements, and I
Mm.
was uncertain what that meant. So, like, does the does the asymmetry not show a type of, like, um a type of measurement in that regard? I'm still kind of confused what she meant by measurement when it comes to moral questions, and also whether or not she was a consequentialist uh in her theory of what is right and wrong. Because I find it, from a quick browse of her material, it seems like she's influenced by Tom Reagan, and she's influenced by abolitionist kind of ethics,
Mm.
and that tends to be more deontological, and you can't use like someone as a means to an end, stuff like that. But later on talks about displacement of wildlife, and sort of like net well-being, or it could cause more net suffering, stuff like that. So it was kind of confusing to me. I wasn't too sure where she was coming from in that regard for her normative theory. But that aside, the I think the arguments that she brought up were interesting, and yeah, I'm glad that she both tackled it. I hope you guys have a second conversation. Um, but yeah, those are my initial thoughts right now. Some more things will probably come up now that
Mm.
we're watching it together. Did you have any comments before we start?
The only thing I would say is, as people see when we go through it, the main disagreement that we kept on coming back to is, um, as she defines agnosticism on this issue, what are the implications then for your actions? And we just had a fundamental disagreement there, which we kept on coming back to. And the 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 disagreement was, that she said, if you don't know what the outcome of an action is going to be in terms of the impact on the individual you're doing the action to, um, you should just do what you want. Whereas my position was, and this is all given, like, you don't have to do the action at all. It's completely unnecessary to do it. I said, you should not do the action, and you should err on the side of caution, given that erring on the side of caution literally poses no risk of harm to the being in question, or the potential being. So that was the main thing we kept on coming back to, as you'll see. But the key areas of disagreement were, um, uh, is it actually, sort of, is it reasonable to be agnostic on this situation, given what we know about reality. If you are agnostic, what does that actually mean practically for your actions? And the last one was, she kept on saying that she had come up with sort of symmetrical arguments for everything that I was saying. And she was quite strong on that. She kept on saying, if you come up with if there's a line of symmetry with your argument for the opposing side, then it's not a valid argument. And I did explain to her multiple times why the symmetry she was pointing out didn't actually exist, but I just don't think she really understood what I was saying, to be honest. Yeah. So those were the three main areas of disagreement, I would say.
Okay, let's jump right into it.
With this discussion, because you took the time to write like quite long, comprehensive responses to my Instagram post, do you just kind of want to go through them and then we can just discuss it and see where we agree and where we disagree? Or we can go through my post first and then see what your response was and then just talk about it, or what would you prefer?
I reckon, should we go through your post and then, because I can just like there's maybe no point us reading my response because I'm here, so I can just say it verbally.
Yeah, okay. Sure. All right.
So yeah, I reckon if we go through yours and then.
Okay, so the misunderstanding I thought was, hang on, let me just get the post up. A lot of your refutes to the original post sort of were characterized as I was coming at it from a pronatal position. So just a reminder that when we do this discussion, my argument for this is for people to be agnostic. I think that's the most reasonable thing with anti-natalism. So just like a reminder, when we do talk about it, you're refuting a agnostic position. Yeah, I could be, but as we talk now, I'm agnostic on anti-natalism, and that the post that I did was showing arguments and the position for being agnostic on anti-natalism.
Can I quickly ask you a clarifying question? What does agnosticism look like on this topic?
When you say look like, as in what is
the substance of it? Because like as far as I could tell, if you're agnostic on the situation, you wouldn't procreate, and so agnosticism kind of leads to the same practical outcome as being against procreation.
I mean, to me, agnostic is just you're uncertain, so people can just do whatever they prefer because there's no, like, for me, there isn't a.
So one thing I wanted to say here is, this is actually another thing, is because I feel like throughout the discussion, the limelight was often on me and what I was saying. And so I did feel, and maybe I'm being unfair here, but I did feel like she was able to get away with making a lot more vague statements than I was. And I mean, that was probably my fault because I didn't press her on it enough. But I did feel that often she would be able to say just vague statements that seemed to rebut what I was saying, but actually she wasn't really saying anything at the same time. And a good example was what she just said, is she said, agnosticism is basically that you're uncertain, but she didn't actually say uncertain about what. She didn't specify what she was uncertain about. So this is just,
What do you think she meant by that? Probably, I'm thinking that she meant like uncertain about the outcomes of creating a new being.
Well, so it could be uncertain about the outcomes. It could be uncertain about whether it's actually ethical to do it, even if you know what the outcomes are.
Yeah.
So I don't actually know what she meant by that. And I think going through the conversation, because of the vagueness and the ambiguity of sometimes what she was saying, she was able to sort of hop between different positions, I felt.
Okay, gotcha.
Which is probably my fault, to be honest.
Okay, ready to continue?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Sound argument for pronatalism or anti-natalism. So to me, it doesn't really matter what people do at this stage. So I see no reason why they shouldn't just do what their preferences say in the absence of a strong argument for either case. So me, no, because I'm never going to procreate. I never want kids. Like I'm just no. Me not having kids is not me being an anti-natalist, just because my actions might show that my actions might be anti-natalist because I'm not having kids in that essence. But I don't think that's a reflection of what I actually think on this. So does that kind of make sense or not?
No, I totally get you. So basically, like if someone looked at you and your actions, you would, basically have the same actions as an anti-natalist, but the reasons, or maybe the lack of reasons, are different. That's basically so like.
Yeah. So basically, it's just uncertain, and whatever people are doing now, I don't have a moral judgment on.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So again, here I just want to say that I specifically put it to her, and I said, so even though the beliefs are different between an agnostic and an anti-natalist, the actions end up being the same. And the reason I was saying that is because the actions of the or the non-actions of the agnostic should be informed by the precautionary principle. And she agreed with it there, like explicitly. I explicitly said it, and she said yes multiple times. I think she said yeah. And you'll see later on in the discussion, she just hops back to the other position and just keeps changing again.
Yeah. Okay.
Until like I'm convinced either way, which I don't know if I'll ever be, because my position is I don't understand how people are coming to the conclusions they're coming to on either side, just because it's such an abstract philosophy. Yeah. So if I were to argue with a pro-natalist as well, I would still probably be saying the same things, which is kind of ironic because you know, they're coming at it from completely separate like different ends of the spectrum. But yeah, the uncertainty thing is a big one for me, and that was the argument I was most convinced. And yeah,
I was just going to say, just because I don't know if we wanted to get hung up on this bit about agnosticism before, but the one thing I just wanted to say is I feel like there's somewhat of a there's like an unequal weighting. So if you're agnostic, I would say your position should still be that people shouldn't procreate, because if you're agnostic, you actually don't know if it's okay to procreate yet. And so if someone does, that is at best reckless. Whereas if you are agnostic and you don't procreate, well, no one is potentially getting hurt. Do you get what I mean? Like if you're agnostic, you should err on the side of caution anyway. And erring on the side of caution is non-procreation because you're not involving.
But erring on the side of caution, you've already taken an anti-natalist position. That's not agnostic, because you've already taken the view that creating sentient life is bad. So you wouldn't be agnostic, you would still be a...
Go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to say here is that I don't even think she fully understands what agnosticism is, because she's saying there that if you're agnostic and you don't procreate because of the precautionary principle, you therefore have already accepted, like, just a priori that it's bad to do so. Whereas actually that's not what agnosticism is. Agnosticism is saying, I don't know if it's good or bad. And you can take that position and still use the precautionary principle to say, it may be bad. I don't know if it is, but it may be bad. And so I'm not going to do it if I don't have to. And I just don't think she fully appreciated that. To be honest, I don't want to sound harsh, but I just don't think she understood what her own position was. Like from what she just said, she clearly didn't know what agnosticism was.
Okay.
Do you agree?
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from.
Because she's saying that to use the precautionary principle, you have to accept something already about the situation, which actually you don't have to.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I just heard this part where she's like, you're taking the anti-natalist position. I wasn't sure like why that was a negative. I just got to rewind a little bit. 1 sec.
And so if someone does, that is at best reckless. Whereas if you are agnostic and you don't procreate, well, no one is potentially getting hurt. Do you get what I mean? Like if you're agnostic, you should err on the side of caution anyway. And erring on the side of caution is non-procreation because you're not involving.
But erring on the side of caution, you've already taken an anti-natalist position.
Like, I don't get why that's a... Yeah, some people think it's a risk, right? So they don't want to take that risk, right?
Well, I don't even think it's a matter of like some people think it's a risk. I think everyone knows it's a risk, and if anyone doesn't think it's a risk, they are clearly delusional. Because like anyone, all you have to literally do is just look around you. Like everyone, you don't have to be a scientist and have done a study to look around you and know that people suffer, and some people suffer a lot.
Right.
Yeah, which is actually another point on often, I'm not sure she explicitly says it, but often throughout the conversation, she sort of alludes to the fact that we don't really have any good way of telling whether people suffer a lot or not, like, or at least, measure it, which I don't think is particularly true. Like, sure, you can't put a number on suffering, but I think you can draw reasonable, you can make reasonable statements about how much suffering there is.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you're able to do that, even though, in the grand scheme of things, it may be very rudimentary, I think that's probably enough to be able to inform a position like antinatalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not agnostic, because you've already taken the view that creating sentient life is bad.
Oh, yeah. There seems to be like an issue there with the terms. You're just saying if you're agnostic, then err on the side of caution.
Yeah, because you don't know.
Yeah, and then she's saying something else, but I'm not too sure what she's trying to say. Like,
Well,
if you're uncertain, I think she's applying this principle of what was it called? Indifference. I think that's what she was trying to get at, possibly.
Well, I think the confusion here is that she was thinking that if you apply the precautionary principle, you've already assumed that the outcome is going to be bad, which is not actually what the precautionary principle is. Like, with the precautionary principle, the outcome could be good, but you don't know if it's going to be good, and you don't have to take the action. And so, as a precaution, because it may be bad, not it will be bad, it may be bad, then don't do it if you don't have to.
Yeah.
But I don't think she understood that. I think she thought it meant the precautionary principle assumes that it is bad.
Okay.
So you wouldn't be agnostic, you would still be a soft anti-natalist or something like that. Whereas my position is complete uncertainty. I think this is such an abstract, broad topic. So for me to say, oh, we don't know, are on the side of caution, I've already taken a somehow like backdrop that anti-natalism is the correct philosophy. For me, it's just, I have no idea, do what you want until we have a more solid like argument for pronatalism or anti-natalism.
But do you not think if we're uncertain on the topic, it shouldn't be the case that you should do what you want? It should actually be, don't do anything yet until you're sure.
Not necessarily. I mean, unless there is slight evidence on either side that someone, that some huge, like an overwhelming cause of harm is going to happen, then I wouldn't take a side. But in most cases where people create sentient life, it's not that clear what kind of outcome is going to happen. And anti-natalism is the view that no one should create sentient life, ever. So I wouldn't be willing to say that for every single situation, or have that as a baseline philosophy. Because in my opinion...
Yeah.
Well, one thing I just wanted to say is, and I think we actually cleared this up later on in the discussion, but I think what she'd done is she'd come into the conversation with a straw man of antinatalism in her head, because multiple times throughout the discussion, she lays out a proposed definition for what it is. And each time I correct her. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, and another thing, which is later on down the line, I think what she had in her head was that antinatalism is just a very sort of like simple statement that you have to adhere to like religiously. Whereas I was, in the conversation we were having, I was adding in loads of caveats and nuance. And I think that kind of like threw her off a bit. And she didn't really like it, because she would say like, oh no, but it means this, really hardline thing. And I used later the example of like animal rights. It's like, well, yeah, if you just read like a 2-sentence definition of animal rights, then you may be able to draw some sort of hardline philosophy from it. But like, animal rights has caveats and nuance all over it, and she accepts that. So I don't know why she didn't accept it for this.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a good example to use, since you're both animal rights activists. Yeah, and I agree. Yeah.
And it's way too broad and too abstract. Like, it's just making claims on things that we just don't know. You know what I mean? I don't understand why people feel compelled to have such a strong position either way.
Yeah, I would say, because maybe the first slide we go through is like the definition you gave, but I would say antinatalism isn't necessarily the the opposition to the creation of any sentient life. I would say there's the occasional slight caveat. So the classic one is like if you create a sentient being that is literally incapable of experiencing suffering or anything that they wouldn't want. So, you know, if they have a life of pure bliss, which is obviously, like, in reality, that's never actually practically going to be possible, probably anyway. Then I would say what I would be, and I would say most antinatalists would probably be just agnostic on that. Or not agnostic, but just indifferent. Like, you create them, you don't create them, it doesn't really matter either way. Like, if they get created, they're going to have this blissful life, like nothing bad is going to come to them. But if you don't create...
Yeah, and I think Benatar talked about this multiple times, that if, you know, in a perfect world case scenario, that it would be neutral. But at the same time, I think people who argue for the consent argument would say you're still doing something without their consent. So that it still might be a violation there. So yeah, it'd be either neutral on one school of thought, potentially still a violation on the other, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And like,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree with that. And it's like, if someone came at me with the consent argument, like, that is not a hill I'm going to die on. Like, if they want to not create beings that would have had a perfect life anyway, like, whatever, no one's going to get hurt by that. But like, my personal view is just like, if people do have like a perfectly blissful life, like, if you violate their consent and bring them into existence, like, you haven't really done anything that bad, in my view. Like, it doesn't really matter on the grand scheme of things. Like, no harm has come to the person. But like, people may disagree on that. Did anyway, so they're not going to miss it. So I wouldn't say it's like the total opposition to any creation of sentient life, but in reality, it does.
We have that caveat, and then we can ask the question: what about 99%?
Yeah, so like, you have to actually create a new reality to make the argument, like, for pronatalism to actually, you know, be okay. And I feel like someone could say, well, that's conditional based on reality, and it's like, yes, it is. It's the you know, as long as reality includes serious suffering and harm, this isn't a good thing to create new sentient beings into existence, or to cause it. And yeah, so unless you're willing to live into a perfect world, we got to work with what we're given, right? This is the context we're in. Yeah.
That well-being, 1% suffering, and then most people would be like, oh yeah, okay, maybe that's okay too. And then it's like, what about 98%? What about 90%? What about 80%? So obviously there's a threshold.
So I think this is where you bring up the well, for the even if it's a net good, like, who are the goods good for, right? If the person doesn't exist, but the prevention of those harms would be a good as well. So I think you do bring that up. Let's just...
Yeah, I can't actually remember what I say here, but one thing I do want to add is, she talks about a threshold, and she sort of asserts like, oh yeah, you clearly have a threshold. And I didn't actually push back on this, because she was saying like, oh, you know, if it's 99% good and 1% bad, then you're probably okay with that. But I actually, I think I do maybe later. But basically, I think she was trying to get in there that, you know, there is some sort of threshold, and so for somehow I'm being unreasonable because I'm not able to point out exactly where the threshold is. But I've like already said before, and I say later, that you can call it the threshold if you want, but basically the threshold is zero. Like, if there's any harm that's going to come to someone and you literally don't have to create them, don't do it. But I think she was trying to get in there that like, oh, well, your threshold is a bit more ambiguous, and therefore it's like a point against you somehow. But yeah, I didn't really push back on that as strongly as I should have.
Somewhere, and that's one of the things I think it's reasonable to be uncertain on, and it also leads you to a place of agnosticism, in my opinion, even when we're talking about this caveat that anti-natalism has, because it is so, I don't know if subjective is the right word, but there is some kind of threshold that even anti-natalists apparently seem to have, where if there is a certain amount of well-being met, then the creation of sentient life is okay. So it still leads you to this position where, okay, I'm not sure then, because I don't know what sort of life you're going to have if we're going down that kind of branch of argument that you just brought up. So yeah, a world with complete perfect well-being, that's never going to happen, but maybe slight suffering, that might be okay as well. and then you just get into these gray areas. So it's still very unclear to me whether anti-natalism or pro-natalism is a thing.
I mean, different anti-natalists will answer differently. So like, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I would say in the case of like 99% and 1%, I would say, yeah, there's literally no reason to bring them into existence. They're not going to miss anything if you don't. Like, they just literally don't exist. They don't exist on any level. So I'd say just don't bring them into existence in that example.
See, I just wouldn't be willing to make that call. Like, just infinite amounts of 99% of like just amazing like orgasms and like amazing wonderful experiences. And then now I'm agnostic.
Whoops. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think her saying this about the whole sort of like 99% orgasms and stuff like that, I think this was her just coming into a conversation about antinatalism and fundamentally misunderstanding the cornerstone of it, which is the axiological asymmetry. Because if she understood it, she would have never have said that, because she would have known that non-existent beings don't want 99% orgasmic lives. Like they just have no interest in that. They don't want it, which I think I say in a minute. But
yeah,
I just wanted to point out that I think the reason she said that comes from a misunderstanding of literally the biggest argument of the philosophy that she's rejecting.
Yeah.
Or anything, and so it doesn't really make that much sense to launch a critique that is.
I just lost it.
So, do you want me to read it, or do you want to measuring that whether non-existence would be preferable to 90% life is okay? So it still leads you to this position where, okay, I'm not sure then, because I don't know what sort of life you're going to have if we're going down that kind of branch of argument that you just brought up. So yeah, a world with complete perfect well-being, that's never going to happen, but maybe slight suffering, that might be okay as well. And then you just get into these gray areas. So it's still very unclear to me whether anti-natalism or pro-natalism is a thing.
I mean, different anti-natalists will answer differently. So like, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I would say in the case of like 99% and 1%, I would say, yeah, there's literally no reason to bring them into existence. They're not going to miss anything if you don't. Like, they just literally don't exist. They don't exist on any level. So I'd say just don't bring them into existence in that example.
See, I just wouldn't be willing to make that call. Like, just infinite amounts of 99% of like just amazing like orgasms and like amazing wonderful experiences. And then
they don't want it. They literally don't want it. They don't exist on any level. There's not some sort of like, nether region of fetus like ghosts trying to get into existence, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. See, again, it will just come back down to we don't have a mechanism for actually like objectively measuring that whether non-existence would be preferable.
So this is where I'm confused about what objective metric would need to be taken to make the claim that there is no deprivation taking place without an existence requirement. This is where I'm very confused about. Like, what type of objective measure would there be if you literally made the claim? There's nobody in the nether realm wanting to or needing or having interests or preferences or whatever, or going to be benefited to be created into existence to have preferences met. You're saying there's no preferences. There's no harm for that deprivation to take place, because there is no deprivation. You need to exist for those deprivations to take place. But the harms, what I'd argue is the guaranteed harms of that happens in life, are prevented, and that is going to be weighed in favor for non-existence, of being created into existence. And of course, later on, you guys go into the consent argument. So yeah, I'd like to understand more about what she meant by subjective measure or objective metric. Do you have any idea?
I don't really know. No, she never gave any like examples, let alone concrete examples of what she meant by that. But one thing I would say, which I think I actually say in the next couple of minutes, is I think like I just make the point of she's making a criticism of a position a lot like on the because there's no measurement that can be taken. But the thing she's criticizing doesn't need a measurement to be taken to stand on its own 2 feet. And so I just didn't understand why she was launching that criticism.
Yeah, if anybody has any comments, please comment below. I'd like to explore that a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say before I continue?
No.
Okay.
To 99% well-being, 1% suffering. To me, if we did have, like when Sam Harris talks about his objective morality, he predicts that in the future there'll be more accurate ways to measure well-being and suffering and happiness through neuroscience. So when people ask for like a practical example of what that objective measurement might look like, because they say, oh, you talk a lot about this objective measurement, but you never like offer an example of that. That's
we just said that.
Usually the one I could probably give. And I just think based on like my basic knowledge of science, it would be difficult to say that non-existence is preferable, or whatever the word is more justified than a world where sentient minds are experiencing 99% well-being, 1% happiness. But if that's where your threshold is at the 1% point, it might just be an axiomatic, difference in our view on life and suffering and happiness.
I think this is one area that I'd like to understand the similarities between whether or not it would be justified for a non-human sentient animal to come into existence, to suffer and die under a vegan worldview for her. Again, I'm not too sure if she's like, you have no right to exploit and kill an animal, unless, because I think later on you talk about wild animal suffering and that she might bite the bullet on farmed animals. If it's going to displace enough land to reduce wild animal suffering. I think she does bite the bullet on that. I could be wrong, but
I think she does as well.
But this is like a perfect example where I would like to understand, well, what is her objection to creating non-human sentient animals to suffer and die? Like, what's the underpinning to that? From my understanding of Tom Reagan, it's we don't have a justification to be killing them and to be exploiting them. And I feel like, if you see these harms happening, this fits, you can see those harms, but then you argue, well, what if it's 99% pleasure and bliss on a Oprah Winfrey kind of type of farm, right? Does that net well-being outweigh that harm? I'd just be very curious about that. You have anything to say before I continue? And sorry for talking so fast. I just got another meeting in like soon.
No, that's cool. Well, we're on the topic of your first one, the principle of uncertainty. So should we just go through, should we quickly, just so it's, I don't know if the word is formalized, but should we just read through your post so it says exactly what you said, and then I can...
Yeah. So do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
No, you go for it, and then I can do my one.
Okay, so I've changed from being someone who supported anti-natalism to being agnostic on the philosophy. No time to do a video, but we're doing a video now, so here it is. The following are the main principles. So the first one is the principle of uncertainty. There is no data that shows whether most sentient life would prefer existence to non-existence or vice versa. There is also no data or current mechanism, doesn't necessarily have to be empirical data, just any kind of concept almost, either way empirical or, what's the other one that isn't conceptual?
So what about I'm so confused. A conceptual measurement of like weighing the benefits and harms. Wouldn't that,
like the asymmetry?
Yeah, wouldn't that be it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which to be fair, I didn't push her on that, but yeah.
Yeah.
To measure the overall quality of life in the world has to indicate whether existing is better than non-existing. In the absence of data or mechanism, the principle of uncertainty applies and generally leads one to being agnostic on the issue.
So she held a panel discussion on antinatalism. Did this not come up? Did you watch that video? I haven't watched the video. I need to, but
I did watch it, but it was so long ago I forget what was discussed.
Okay, yeah, fair.
Cool. So I will just go over what I said in my response. So I basically said that I feel like your critique, and maybe I'm wrong on this, so we'll get into it. But I felt like your critique was sort of aiming at the wrong thing. So when you said there's no data that shows whether most sentient life would prefer to exist or prefer existence or non-existence or vice versa, it kind of bases it on some empirical certainty, but then you said as well some sort of conceptual mechanism as well.
Any unit of measurement.
Yeah. So basically my response was that I feel like the position on the table isn't one where you really need to measure anything, and so it doesn't really make that much sense to launch a critique that is based on the measurement of something. So let's say, for example, you were able to measure pain and pleasure in some sort of at least vaguely accurate way. If not, we come up with some sort of way to like very accurately measure it. You basically have two general possibilities, apart from the middle one where it's like you have exactly balanced, you know, pain and pleasure or good or bad or whatever you want to call them, but like that's probably very unlikely. So you find that like most sentient life have like, you know, net positive life, or, you know, if you're able to ask them, they say, yeah, I've enjoyed my life. I would say this isn't a reason to bring them into existence, because when they're in the state of non-existence originally, they don't want any of this good stuff. They have no interest in having it. They have no need for it. It doesn't matter to them. And so if you don't give it to them, then they're not deprived in any way. Then on the other hand, you could also find that most sentient life, or all sentient life or whatever, have like a net negative life, or, you know, they have a life that when you ask them if you can, they say, no, I'd prefer not to have lived this. I would say that is a reason not to bring them into existence, because even if in the state of non-existence, they don't have any interests at that point, if you're comparing the two scenarios, you know that they're going to be better off in non-existence. And so if you have this empirical or other way of measuring things, you get to the same conclusion as just being able to do it in your head in the abstract. And so it doesn't really it doesn't really make sense to me to make some sort of critique based on measurement, because I just don't see why, if you do all these measurements, it seems like you're just going to get to the same conclusion, that with the individual who you're creating in the limelight, they don't really have anything to gain, but they do have a lot to lose. And so from my perspective, like the principle of uncertainty, like the uncertainty of the quality of life you're creating, is an argument for not bringing new life into existence, because you're uncertain about what the quality is going to be. And so, yeah, I just don't see how any sort of like empirical or mechanistic, if that's a word, uncertainty is an argument against antinatalism. If anything, it's either not an argument against it or an argument for it. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like, it's less about empirics, although one day empirical data might be involved, but it's more, yeah, I guess the mechanistic, conceptual way to determine whether sentience or not is justified. I would agree with you on the second one about if it's guaranteed. You know, I don't think really poor, like people without resources, and it's guaranteed that kid is going to suffer terribly, should have kids. But to me, that's not anti-natalism. Anti-natalism is all sentient, bringing all sentient life into the world.
One thing I just wanted to point out here is that she was pressing, and again, this is somewhere I fell down in the debate because I didn't do it, but earlier she was pressing me to specify a threshold, which I did. I said 0 suffering. Whereas now she is outlining the fact that actually there are cases that she would oppose procreation. So obviously she has a threshold. Now, at this point, I should have pushed her and said, well, what number are you going to put on it?
Yeah.
What amount of suffering is okay to inflict on someone to then, you know, because you're bestowing these goods on them that they didn't even want in the first place. And presumably her response would have been, well, I don't have an exact, you know, number because you can't measure it. And then I would have said, okay, well, if you can't measure it and you don't have an exact number and you don't really know what suffering you don't know two things. One, you don't know how much suffering you would allow, and two, you don't know how much suffering your kid is actually going to have. And so surely, given those two things, you should refrain from procreating. And I think I would have got her in a corner there, but I obviously didn't do that.
Yeah, that would have been, yeah, that's a good response.
Is bad.
I also would like to hear her view on that. Maybe make a note of that next time you talk to her.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'll probably watch this back,
Okay.
and I'll note that down.
Bad. And so just clarifying your position, is your position that because they are likely to suffer, because they will suffer at some point, there's no reason to bring them into the world?
So you mean anyone, like even someone in a very like affluent area?
Yeah, I just mean because you have that very the only way you would agree with bringing sentient life into the world is if they could experience a perfect life with no suffering whatsoever.
Yeah. So when I'm making this like judgment in my head, I'm thinking about the individual being that's going to be created. And so I feel like they literally have no interests in coming into existence. They don't want it. They don't need it. All of this sort of stuff. And if you do bring them into existence, you're going to cause them harm in some way. And so I just don't see why you would, and why it would be justifiable with respect to the one that you're creating. I feel like a lot of people say, if you're raised in an affluent area or something like that, I feel like a lot of people will then try to justify it by saying, oh, well, they've had this net positive life, or look at all these good things. But it's like they're trying to justify all of the bad things that they've inflicted on someone by creating them, by appealing to positive things that person didn't even want in the first place. So it makes no sense to me to try and justify bad things you've inflicted on someone with these other things that they didn't actually want, they never asked for, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I understand that position, but it's still highly subjective in that I guess your position values suffering so much and it doesn't place much value on well-being. And
well, even if you place high value on well-being, those values would be for those that exist, right? That's the main contention here. Obviously, well, I don't know for you, but like, yeah, as long as you exist, obviously well-being matters and is valuable, but without that existence requirement, yeah.
I actually say this in maybe 30 seconds. I say, if you do exist, then we should value your well-being, but
Okay.
if you don't exist, well-being doesn't really mean anything to you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that is unreasonable. So it's still
Well, can
not.
I make a...
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I agree with you, but only from the standpoint of someone who doesn't exist already. If someone exists like me and you, like obviously I put loads of value on well-being, because I want, now that we exist, I want us to both have as good a life as possible. But when someone doesn't exist, it kind of seems to me like the only thing you really need to consider is whether they are going to come into harm's way when you create them. Because I mean, whether they're going to win the lottery or become a doctor and have like a really high income or meet the love of their life, like, I don't know, none of those things really matter, because it's like they don't exist, like they don't want any of that stuff. But it would be a really bad thing to do to create them and all these evils happen to them, like cancer ravaging their body, or something like that.
I mean, like, I just don't think it's an argument for anti-natalism, because it
is
still, it's just placing this huge value on suffering and then excluding these other things that beings can experience. And to say we don't know what they would want, like, you don't know because they don't exist. Like, I still don't.
Yeah.
She says, again, I think this was one of the examples of sort of her being a bit ambiguous, is she says, well, you can't, just exclude well-being and put value on suffering. But she doesn't explain why. And I had already previously given an argument for why you can do that, which is the axiological asymmetry. and she just asserted that you couldn't and then moved on. She didn't actually explain why that's an invalid thing to do.
Right. Okay.
Understand how we would even measure that, because they don't exist yet. It's like it's still having a very strong stance on something that we can't measure, but you've obviously applied some kind of like measurement to it, like based on your value.
See, that just confuses me so much. Like, how would we measure the wants of a non-existent being? It's literally making like a type of, I don't even know, an ontological or metaphysical claim of it's just kind of like an intuition, I guess. You could say, how is that intuition justified? But it's like, really, like the nothingness. We're gonna like ask if the nothingness has a preference. I feel like that's a given. And if that's given, or if you concede on that point, then these things follow. I'm not too sure about what measurement is required for this type of. You don't know if they want ?
Values, which I understand, but I guess I just disagree in its accuracy and how universally it could be applied. Yeah.
You know how you were saying like we don't know what others would want, because you know we're making a judgment.
I also feel like there's a lot of this natural language. I think you're doing a good job. I think it would have really helped to have this formalized into a syllogism, because I think that it would have been easier to follow or to like pinpoint points of disagreement, because it seems like this may go in circles. And I think it does a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I agree with you, but I'm kind of like, because I'm like a newbie to all this, I'm kind of scared of like of like formal syllogisms,
Yeah.
which is just something that I should and probably will get over. But yeah, I'm not very good at writing as well, which is
okay.
On the situation from sort of like our perspective, and we don't really necessarily know what the preferences would be of the being that may be created.
It's not really a preference. It's just more whether sentience is justified. That's the question I think we cannot answer without arbitrarily.
I don't know. I was going to nitpick on something here, whether or not sentience is justified, but it's like whether or not it's justified to create sentience. But like that's a small nitpick.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, no, you're right to nitpick, because I think I'm literally about to do that, because I don't actually know what she means. Like, what do you mean by is sentience justified? Do you mean like in and of itself? Because that's kind of a nonsensical statement.
Yeah.
I think she means one person creating another sentient being.
Yeah.
But I think it was just like she didn't specify that.
Okay.
Ascribing, our own values to it, which I think is really like not a good way to do it, just because, I'm one person, I think suffering is bad, therefore anti-natalism. You know what I mean? I think there are so many other possible ways to measure whether sentience can be justified. I'm not sure of those ways yet, but just on that baseline, I wouldn't be confident in having an anti-natalist worldview.
What do you mean by sentience being justified? Do you mean it in and of itself, or do you mean like the creation of it by someone else?
Yeah, the creation of it, whether that can be justified or not. That's why I'm in that agnostic position, because there's all this harm that could potentially happen, but then there's also well-being. So my position considers both, like well-being and like happiness and all these like wonderful things, as well as suffering. And I don't agree with people who say, no, it's not justified because definitely it's going to cause harm. And I don't really agree with people who say, oh, no, don't worry. Like, they're going to experience all this happiness and blah, 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 because of that unit of measurement that I need to come to a like certain place where you are and where pronatalists are. Yeah.
I was going to say something else, but I've completely forgotten it. So I'll go with this thought that I was just thinking. In terms of like sentience being justified, so, this was the thing I was going to say. I just wanted to clarify for, I'm pretty sure you already would understand this clarification, but just for anyone who ends up watching this, the reason that I asked about what you meant by sentience being justified is I wanted to make sure the distinction was understood between sentience itself and one person creating another sentient life. So, for example, if you use the example of like the extinction of humans as a species, I'm not necessarily pro-extinction. I'm just anti-procreation.
I want to highlight that a couple of times because I feel like some people might box you into that corner of being like an extinctionist anti-natalist.
Yeah.
So, yep, just highlighting that. I
What,
believe
as
the
in
same
you
thing, by
agree?
the way. Oh no, I'm 100% in agreement, and
Yeah.
it's just, you know, there are people that argue that, so just good to know.
Yeah, I just wanted to I really wanted to clarify that in this, because I think what she wanted to do, and maybe I'm being unfair here, but I think what she wanted me to do is specify this something that is considered really extreme, or even more extreme than what I'm saying already. And she wanted me to say that is my goal and that's what I'm aiming for.
Yep.
But that isn't, and it wasn't in the conversation I was having. Like, my goal is not extinction. My goal is just to try and influence people to stop procreating. Now, a natural result of that, well, to be honest, I don't need to say it again because I'm about to say it, but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Now, people not procreating will, just naturally lead to extinction, but extinction isn't really the goal per se. And I'll give an example. Let's say we all stop procreating overnight, right? No new beings are born into existence, but somehow, like, all of the humans already in existence gain immortality. Is it immortality when you live forever?
Immortality, yeah.
Yeah. Let's say they gain immortality. Well, I would not say that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, as long as they had a way to opt out, like euthanasia or something like that. Like,
I just want to say 100% agree. I've had a discussion with Phil Torres on this, so yeah, glad that. It's funny, I saw this already, and I this didn't pop out at me, but I'm glad that we're reviewing it together because yeah, you and I have a lot of similarities. It looks like, or at least on these cases, on this. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I keep good company then.
Yeah.
Don't want someone to be trapped in
Mm.
existence forever if they don't want it. So this is an example I mean, is that if these people are already in existence and they can live forever and it's up to them, well, that's fine. They have their own life. They're going to make their own choices. That's up to them. So I'm not necessarily pro-extinction. It's just like, no one is immortal. And so extinction would naturally come from the position I hold, if you get what I mean.
So the ultimate goal, because as I understood it, the human extinction was or is a goal of a lot of anti-natalists that I.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate the point here is that this is where two things were highlighted to me. One, I don't think she had I think her understanding of antinatalism was and probably still is, because it hasn't been that much time since this conversation, malnourished, as is evident by that statement and several statements she'd made before. The second thing is, I think this is an example of where, how I was saying before, is that she kind of wanted the view I had, or antinatalism, to be very simple and like kind of hardline or extreme. And then she wanted to be able to refute that, which is basically a straw man. But then I wasn't, and antinatalism doesn't fit into that neat little box that you can then just reject.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of got on her nerves a bit. But again, I don't want to like put words in her mouth and stuff. That was just my reading of the situation.
Yeah, and to be fair, we have a spectrum of beliefs within the antinatalism community. So, if she's seeing posts or looking online and seeing like an antinatalist saying, yes, by force, or, we need to work on an ethical extinction, it's not too far to like, yeah, unless you actually like think about all the other nuanced positions that, she can have this assumption about the position, but antinatalism is about the ethics of creating sentient life. That's it.
Yeah.
All the rest is like coupled with other beliefs and values and normative theories as well. So yeah, I'm sympathetic to this, but yeah, like you clarified your position. So now it's on her, I believe, to be to attack your framework at that point, I believe. Yeah.
I've spoken to. But obviously there are subcategories and there's differences among people who identify as anti-natalist.
Oh, well, there you
So
go.
for you, is it a reduction in population? Like, what is the ultimate goal for anti-natalism for you?
Well, the ultimate goal is just for no one to create any new life. Now, like, obviously in the situation we're in now, that would lead to just no one existing. But let's say in the future, you know, because the human population isn't just going to go away now. So we are going to be around for some time, regardless of what I think. So let's say, you know, 1,000 years down the line or something, we're able to come up with some technology where you can give someone an injection and they can live forever. It's not like I would go around and campaign for people not to get that injection. Like, it's up to them. If they want to do that, that's fine. So no, I would not say I'm necessarily pro extinction. My goal is just to, you know, go around, try and influence people so that they will make the decision not to procreate themselves. I'm not going to force anyone to do anything. I'm not going to.
But what is the argument
Just want to say, agreed, 100%. I'm with you right now.
for that if the goal isn't human extinction? Like, why? Like, what?
So the goal is to prevent this, the suffering, or to at least not violate those consent rights. So those two things, to prevent those harms. That's the goal, at least for me. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different goal?
No, I mean, it depends what she means by goal. Does she mean personal goal, or does she mean goal of the philosophy? Because I can't really speak for the goal of the philosophy. Like, the philosophy is not this conscious being. Like, different people interpret it differently. But my personal goal is just to try and influence people to get them to stop procreating. Like, I'm not going to frog march people to a sterilization clinic or anything.
No, you just want them to make wise choices for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And given the landscape that we're in at the moment, where literally you probably couldn't make things that much worse as an individual. I mean, maybe some individuals could who had a lot of power and influence, but I probably couldn't make things that much worse. And so I've got to be quite humble about what I can do in the positive direction as well. So all I want to do is, you know, have some sort of modest influence in nudging, you know, the world, or you know, however you want to frame it, into the direction of less beings coming into existence, and the beings that already are in existence or will be brought into existence despite my efforts have a better existence than they otherwise would have had.
Yeah.
I think it's very simple, but I think the simplicity of it kind of annoys some people because they want to be able to refute some sort of hardline extreme sort of thing, whereas it actually isn't.
All right, I accidentally skipped. I don't know where I was. Do you remember?
I can't. When I'm making this, I can't see the bar of the times or whatever.
Oh, okay.
It's like whether they're going to win the lottery or extinction. But extinction isn't really the goal per se.
It's around here.
I'll give an example. Let's say we all stop procreating overnight, right? No new beings are brought into existence. So this is an example I mean, is that if these people are already in existence and they can live forever and it's up to them, well, that's fine. You know, they have their own life. They're going to make the
ultimate goal for antinatalism.
No one is immortal, and so extinction would naturally come from the position I hold, if you get what I mean.
So the ultimate goal, because as I understood it, the human extinction was or is a goal of a lot of antinatalists that I've spoken to. But obviously there are subcategories and there's differences among people who identify as antinatalists. So for you, is it a reduction in population? Like, what is the ultimate goal for antinatalism for you?
Well, the ultimate goal is just for no one to create any new life. Now, like, obviously in the situation we're in now, that would lead to just no one existing. But let's say in the future, you know, because the human population isn't just going to go away now. So we are going to be around for some time, regardless of what I think. So let's say, you know, 1,000 years down the line or something, we're able to come up with some technology where you can give someone an injection and they can live forever. It's not like I would go around and campaign for people not to get that injection. Like, it's up to them. If they want to do that, that's fine. So no, I would not say I'm necessarily pro extinction. My goal is just to, you know, go around, try and influence people so that they will make the decision not to procreate themselves. I'm not going to force anyone to do anything. I'm not going to.
But what is the argument for that if the goal isn't human extinction? Like, why? what is the argument for anti-natalism? Like, if you could say it in a couple of words, like a couple of sentences, because this is something someone asked me when I was anti-natalist. I actually couldn't provide a proper answer because I didn't have, because I'm like, it's not human.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what I say here, because I don't think she thought I was just going to reel out like several different arguments, and I could have gone more. I didn't even touch the misanthropic arguments. So I want to hear your like thoughts on how I lay them out and the ones I lay out and stuff.
Okay, cool.
Human extinction. It's not this. Like, so what is the argument for anti-natalism?
So just so I sort of what's the word, define the framing or whatever. So when I think about it, I'm not thinking on some sort of like large population scale stuff like this. I'm thinking about the individual that's going to be created, right? But obviously that then, once you've made a sort of judgment call on that, it sort of scales up to,
right,
well, that would apply to everyone else, and so it would apply to a population and stuff like that. So when you're thinking, I mean, to be honest, there's loads of different arguments, so I probably won't get through all of them now, but when you're thinking about bringing someone into existence, there's many different things you've got to take into account. So they can be broken down into basically two main categories, and they're usually called like misanthropic and philanthropic, right? So the philanthropic ones concern the individual that's being created, and the misanthropic ones concern, if the being is created, what impact would that have externally, like on the world and the beings around them, right? So the philanthropic ones, the main ones are like the axiological asymmetry. So that's basically comparing the, non-existent with the existent. So you're saying, if you don't exist or you exist and have a good life, or if you compare those two things, it's like, yeah, if you exist and have a good life, that's good, but it's not a reason to bring you into existence because you never wanted to come into existence anyway. And then you compare non-existence and existence where you've had a really shit life. And it's like, if you come into existence and have a really shit life, well, that is really bad. So actually we should avoid that. Even if you don't have any interest to avoid pain in non-existence, we know that it would be so shit here. That is a reason not to do that to you, right? So that's the axiological asymmetry. Another one is should we quickly just argument. So it's basically.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, should we just go through them one by one and you can react to each? Like, unless you've got no reaction, then it's fine. Like, I don't want to force you into doing it.
Okay, let me re-listen to that part. I don't think I have a disagreement or any comments on this actually. But let me just listen to it one more time.
You never wanted to come into existence anyway. And then you compare non-existence and existence where you've had a really shit life. And it's like, if you come into existence and have a really shit life, well, that is really bad. So actually we should avoid that. Even if you don't have any interest to avoid pain in non-existence, we know that it would be so shit here. That is a reason not to do that to you. So yeah, what do you think of the way that I explained that? Do you think it was an accurate way of explaining it?
I think it's a decent way of explaining it, because like there's multiple asymmetries that he argues for. The first one is like, there's like, the first one is that it's weighed in favor of the positives and the negatives of coming into of not coming into existence, because of that what I call the existence requirement to have preferences that would be set as a positive value, so to speak. That's how that would be weighed, but it's coupled with the reality that of people having sufficient severe harms or sufficient harms enough that this is something that you want to prevent, those harms, and the benefits are only for those that exist. No, I think it's good. I can't. I'm gonna do it one more time. Sorry.
Many different things you've got to take into account. So they can be broken down into basically two main categories, and they're usually called like misanthropic and philanthropic, right? So the philanthropic ones concern the individual that's being created, and the misanthropic ones concern, if the being is created, what impact would that have externally, like on the world and the beings around them, right?
Right.
So the philanthropic ones, the main ones are like the axiological asymmetry. So that's basically comparing the, non-existent with the existent. So you're saying,
Right.
if you don't exist or you exist and have a good life, or if you compare those two things, it's like, yeah, if you exist and have a good life, that's good, but it's not a reason to bring you into existence because
Right.
you never wanted to come into existence anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's the basic. Yeah.
And then you compare non-existence and existence where you've had a really shit life. And it's like, if you come into existence and have a really shit life, well, that is really bad. So actually, we should avoid that, even if you don't have any interest to avoid pain in non-existence.
No, yeah, I think you're doing a great job here. Yeah.
We know that it would be so shit here. That is a reason not to do that to you, right? So that's the axiological asymmetry. Another one is the consent argument. So it's basically it's literally impossible to get consent from someone to bring them into existence, because they don't exist on any level. And when you do bring them into existence, you put them in the way of great harm and all of these things. And so the best thing to do in terms of consent is, just err on the side of caution and don't bring them into existence. Another one is the risk argument. So
I acknowledge the consent argument. I'm not very good at arguing the consent argument, so I don't have that much to say on it. But I think for the most part, I think that's yeah. I'm sorry, I can't really give much commentary on this. If anybody, I know there's plenty of antinatalists that argue for this. So if anybody has any comments on this particular one and the articulation that Lawrence gave, please comment below and we could review that.
Yeah, like if I was going to do this conversation again and put forward the consent argument, like how would you change how I put it forward, basically?
Yeah.
If anyone has any thoughts on that. So even if you're of the position where it is a good thing to bring someone into existence if they have a good life, even if you throw away the axiological asymmetry, you still have the risk argument, which is basically the principle of uncertainty is the argument. This is the argument for antinatalism. The principle of uncertainty is like, you have no real way of being able to judge what creating life is going to be like when they're alive. You may be able to mitigate some, suffering that may come to them by accumulating wealth and stuff like this, but you have no guarantee of being able to ensure they have a really good life. And you're putting them at risk of having a horrible life, potentially. Whereas in the other scenario of them not existing, there's literally no risk to them at all. They don't exist. So that's another example. Yeah, one thing I was just going to say is I think it's worth highlighting the thing I said at the start before I actually laid out the risk argument, is that I think a lot of people who are confronted or just engage with antinatalism, I think they kind of assume that once they've sort of refuted, although I've never heard a good refutation, but once they've refuted the axiological asymmetry, everything else kind of like falls apart. And I don't think people realize that even if you completely ignore the axiological asymmetry, you've still got the risk argument to deal with, because the risk
and
argument
the consent argument too. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think the consent argument is a decent argument. Some people don't see it as a good argument. So you could even ignore the consent argument as well. And you've still got, like, the risk argument just stands on its own. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate that.
Right.
I think they think it's kind of tied to the other ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Another argument, a fourth one, I think it's the fourth one I want, is argument for imposition. So it's basically, life is essentially a series of needs that you have to satisfy and go around. And, if you don't eat, you're going to be hungry and die. If you don't drink, you're going to be thirsty and die. If you don't go around and seek entertainment, you're going to be bored and sort of malnourished in a sort of, not in a nutritional way, but malnourished in sort of like your experiences or whatever. And all of these things, when you create someone, you impose all of those things on them, and then they spend their life having to go around and try and cater for all those needs that they didn't ask for. And there's others as well, but like those are like four ones.
Okay, so the first one.
Okay, yeah, the imposition argument. I don't use that argument myself, but I've seen it articulated in a similar fashion. Again, if anybody does use that argument, please comment below. Lawrence, I got to get to another meeting. I'm sorry. Can we?
No.
Are you available in an hour and to finish this?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we'll stop here because you gave 4 arguments and she's going to respond to them, and we'll do a part 2 of this review in an hour. Was there anything that you want to do or say before we close this video?
The only final thing I'd say, just to round it off, is I usually don't use the imposition argument either. I just wanted to chuck as many out as possible in the video, and those were the 4 main ones I thought of off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't tend to use it either.
Okay, so be sure to comment below and stay tuned for part 2. Catch you in a second.
So yeah.